The morning dew still clung to the roses when I heard the crunch of expensive heels on my garden path. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Only one person would dare to wear Louboutins to stomp through my father's prized garden. Méline. Her voice dripped with fake sweetness. Still playing in the dirt, I see. I continued pruning my father's white roses, the ones he'd planted for my wedding day. The wedding that had ended in divorce papers and my ex-husband running off with the woman now standing behind me. "Hello, Haley," I said, finally turning around and wiping my soil-covered hands on my gardening apron. "You know why I'm here?" She moved closer, her shadow falling across the flower bed. "The reading of the will is tomorrow, and Holden and I think it's best if we discuss things civilly." "There's nothing to discuss," I said firmly, standing up to my full height. "This is my father's house, his estate," Haley corrected me, her perfectly painted red lips curling into a smirk. "And since Holden was like a son to Miles for 15 years, we believe we're entitled to our fair share." The pruning shears in my hand suddenly felt heavier. The same Holden who cheated on me, his daughter, with his secretary, that Holden. "Ancient history, Méline," Haley waved her manicured hand dismissively. "Miles forgave him. They still played golf every Sunday until—" She paused for dramatic effect. "Well, you know. My father's death was still raw, a wound that hadn't even begun to scab over. He'd been gone just weeks, and here was this woman, this vulture, circling what she thought was easy prey. My father wouldn't have left Holden anything," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "He was many things, but he wasn't stupid." Haley's fake smile faltered. "We'll see about that. Your brother Isaiah seems to think differently." The mention of my brother sent a chill down my spine. We hadn't spoken since Dad's funeral, where he'd spent more time consoling Holden than his own sister. "You've spoken to Isaiah?" "Oh, honey." Haley stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We've done more than speak. He's been very helpful." I gripped the pruning shears tighter, remembering Dad's words from years ago. "The roses need a firm hand, Maddie, but never a cruel one. Even the sharpest thorns serve a purpose." "Get off my property, Haley," I said quietly, "before I forget my manners." She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Your property? That's cute. This house is worth millions, Méline. Did you really think you'd get to keep it all to yourself, playing house in your daddy's mansion while the rest of us get nothing?" "My father built this house brick by brick," I said, my voice rising. "He planted every tree, designed every room. This isn't about money, this is about legacy." "Legacy?" Haley snorted. "Wake up, Méline. Everything is about money. And tomorrow, when that will is read, you're going to learn that the hard way." She turned to leave, but paused at the garden gate. "Oh, and you might want to start packing. Holden and I will need at least a month to renovate before we move in." As her heels clicked down the path, I looked down at the roses, their white petals now spotted with soil where my trembling hands had crushed them. Dad had always said white roses represented new beginnings, but all I could see was red. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person I knew would understand. "Aaliyah, it's me. Haley just paid me a visit." "Yeah, she's exactly as bad as we thought. Can you come over? There's something about the will I need to discuss with you." My best friend's voice was firm and reassuring. "I'll be there in minutes. Don't worry, Méline. Your father was smarter than they know." As I ended the call, I noticed a small envelope poking out from beneath one of the rose bushes, its corner damp with dew. The handwriting on it was unmistakably my father's, and it was addressed to me. I picked it up with shaking hands, wondering how long it had been waiting there, hidden among the thorns. The paper felt heavy, like it carried more than just words. "Well, Dad," I whispered, turning the envelope over in my hands. "Looks like you left me one last surprise." The sound of Haley's car engine faded into the distance as I stood in the garden, holding what felt like the first piece of a puzzle my father had left behind. Whatever game Haley and Holden were playing, I had a feeling they were about to learn they'd chosen the wrong opponent. Aaliyah arrived exactly when she promised, her legal briefcase in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. "I figured we might need this," she said, holding up the wine as she walked into Dad's study. I was still holding the unopened envelope, perched on the edge of my father's leather chair. The room smelled of his pipe tobacco and old books, a scent I wasn't ready to lose to Haley's promised renovations. "You haven't opened it yet?" Aaliyah nodded at the envelope, setting her briefcase down with a heavy thunk. "I wanted to wait for you," I said, turning the envelope over again. After what Haley said about Isaiah helping them, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. "Open it, Malene," Aaliyah insisted, pouring 2 generous glasses of wine. "Your father was very specific about certain things being revealed at certain times." My head snapped up. "What do you mean?" She handed me a glass. "Open the letter, Malene." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small key. "Dear Maddie," I read aloud, my father's voice echoing in my head. "If you're reading this, then someone has already made a move on the estate. Knowing human nature as I do, I'm guessing it's Haley. She always did remind me of a shark, all teeth and no soul." Aaliyah snorted into her wine glass. "The key enclosed opens the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside, you'll find everything you need to protect what's yours. Remember what I taught you about chess. Sometimes you have to sacrifice a pawn to protect the queen. Love, Dad." I looked up at Aaliyah, who was already moving toward the desk. "You knew about this?" "I helped him set it up," she admitted, gesturing for me to use the key. "Your father came to me months ago, right after his diagnosis. He knew exactly how things would play out." The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside was a thick manila envelope and a USB drive. "Before you look at those," Aaliyah said, sitting on the edge of the desk, "there's something you need to know about tomorrow's will reading. Your father added a codicil 3 days before he died." "A what?" "A modification to the will, and trust me, it's going to change everything." I spread the contents of the manila envelope across the desk. Photos spilled out, dozens of them. Haley meeting with someone in a dark parking lot. Holden entering a lawyer's office that wasn't Aaliyah's. Bank statements, email printouts. Dad had them investigated, didn't he? Aaliyah's smile was sharp. He had them followed. That USB drive contains video footage of Haley attempting to bribe your father's nurse for information about his will 2 days before he died. My hands shook as I picked up one of the photos. "Is that Isaiah meeting with Haley?" 3 weeks before your father's death, Aaliyah confirmed. But look at his face in the next photo. The second photo showed my brother leaving the meeting, his expression twisted with disgust. He was holding what looked like a check. "He kept the check as evidence," Aaliyah explained. "Brought it straight to your father. That's when Miles knew he had to act fast." "But Haley said Isaiah was helping them." "Your brother's been playing a dangerous game, Malene," Aaliyah said, her voice low. "Feeding them just enough information to keep them confident, all while helping your father gather evidence of their conspiracy." I sank back into the chair, my mind spinning. "Why didn't he tell me?" "Because Haley needed to show her hand first." Aaliyah pulled out some papers from her briefcase. "Tomorrow, when I read the will, Haley and Holden are going to think they've won. The initial reading will grant them a significant portion of the estate." I stood up so fast my wine glass tipped over, staining the carpet red. "What?" "Let me finish." Aaliyah held up her hand. "That's when the codicil kicks in. Your father set up a trap, Malene. The moment they accept the inheritance, they trigger a clause that reveals their attempted manipulation and fraud. Everything, the photos, the videos, the bribes, becomes public record." I stared at the evidence spread across the desk, understanding dawning. He made them think they won so they'd incriminate themselves. Exactly. Aaliyah's grin was triumphant. The real Will leaves everything to you, with a trust set up for Isaiah. Haley and Holden get nothing except a very public exposure of their true characters. And tomorrow, Aaliyah finished her wine. Tomorrow, we watch them walk right into the trap they set for themselves. Your father's last lesson about consequences. I picked up his letter again, running my fingers over his familiar handwriting. Even from beyond the grave, he was protecting me, teaching me, helping me fight back. One more thing, Aaliyah said softly. Isaiah asked to see you tonight. He has something else you need to know before tomorrow. I looked out the study window at the setting sun, thinking of my brother, of Haley's smug face in the garden, of all the pieces my father had carefully put in place. Tell him to come over, I said. It's time we had a family reunion. Isaiah arrived after dark, looking nothing like the confident brother who'd stood beside Holden at the funeral. His designer suit was wrinkled, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He hesitated at the study doorway, clutching a leather portfolio like a shield. You look terrible, I said, breaking the ice. Yeah, well, playing double agent isn't as fun as the movies make it seem. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Can I come in? I gestured to the chair across from me. Aaliyah had left an hour ago, but the evidence of our earlier discovery still littered Dad's desk. I see you found Dad's insurance policy, Isaiah said, nodding at the photos. Why didn't you tell me what you were doing? The question came out sharper than I intended. He slumped into the chair. Because I needed to make it right. After everything with Holden, the way I treated you during the divorce. I was an idiot, Maddie. You were my brother, I corrected, my voice thick with emotion. You were supposed to be on my side. I know. He opened the portfolio and pulled out a check. This is what Haley offered me to testify that Dad wasn't of sound mind when he made his final will. $500,000 to betray my own sister. I stared at the check, then at my brother. But you didn't cash it. No, I took it straight to Dad. Isaiah's voice cracked. You should have seen his face, Maddie. Not angry, just disappointed. That's when he told me about his plan. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 10 times, each dong echoing through the tense silence. There's more, Isaiah continued, pulling out a phone. I recorded everything, every meeting, every offer, every threat. Haley, she's been planning this for months, even before Dad got sick. He pressed play. Haley's voice filled the room. Once the old man kicks it, we'll contest the will with your testimony about his mental state and Holden's long relationship with him. We'll get everything. That bitch Malene won't know what hit her. My hands clenched into fists. When was this? 2 months ago. But wait, there's worse. He fast-forwarded the recording. Holden's voice now. We'll sell the house, liquidate the assets. Malene can go back to her little apartment and her pathetic gardening business. She never deserved any of this anyway. Turn it off, I whispered. Isaiah complied, then pulled out one final document. This is why I came tonight. Haley didn't just want the money, Maddie. She wanted revenge on you. Revenge? For what? For making Holden feel guilty. For making him pay alimony for... He paused. For making him look bad when you caught them together. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Walking into my own bedroom, finding them there. Haley's triumphant smile as my marriage crumbled. She was his secretary for 3 years, Isaiah continued. She planned everything, worked her way into his life, into Dad's social circle. This document proves she started embezzling from Dad's company 6 months before you caught them. I snatched the paper, scanning the bank transfers and account numbers. Dad knew about this. Found out right before his diagnosis. He was building a case against her, but then the cancer... Isaiah's voice trailed off. That's when he started planning this instead, I said, understanding dawning. Sometimes justice needs a different path. The codicil, I murmured. Yeah, tomorrow's going to be brutal, Maddie. They think they've got it all figured out. Haley's even hired a camera crew to document the historic moment when they take possession of the estate. Despite everything, I laughed. She hired cameras to record her own downfall. Dad would have appreciated the irony. Isaiah smiled, a real one this time. Listen, I know I can't fix the past 3 years with one night of revelations, but I want you to know I'm here now. Whatever happens tomorrow, I've got your back. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Dad's garden silvered by moonlight. Remember when we were kids and Dad caught us fighting over that toy car? The red Corvette? Isaiah joined me at the window. He made us wash every window in the house. Said we needed to learn to see things clearly. Clearly. I turned to face my brother. I see clearly now, Isaiah. I see what Dad was trying to teach us, even at the end. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. That sometimes the biggest victory isn't in winning, it's in letting your enemies defeat themselves. The grandfather clock chimed 1/4 past, reminding us that tomorrow was getting closer with each tick. You should get some rest, Isaiah said, gathering his evidence. Tomorrow's going to be one hell of a show. As I watched him leave, I touched the window pane, cool and solid under my fingers. Dad had always loved these windows, said they were the eyes of the house, watching over his family. Tomorrow, they would witness justice served, exactly the way he had planned it. The morning of the will reading dawned bright and clear. I was in Dad's study again, this time watching Aaliyah arrange papers on the massive oak desk while camera equipment was set up around the room. Haley's camera crew is here, Isaiah announced, slipping through the door. You should see her out there, practicing her gracious acceptance speech. Everything ready? I asked Aaliyah. She patted her briefcase. All set. The codicil is sealed in this envelope along with copies of all the evidence. Once they accept the initial terms... A commotion in the hallway cut her off. Haley's voice carried through the door, high and excited. This is where we'll put the new chandelier. The old one is so dated. Places everyone. Let the show begin, Aaliyah muttered, straightening her suit jacket. Haley swept in first, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Holden followed, looking uncomfortable in his tailored suit. The camera crew trailed behind them, adjusting lights and checking angles. Maylene. Holden nodded stiffly. It was the first time he'd spoken to me directly since the divorce. Let us begin, Aaliyah announced, taking her place behind Dad's desk. As Miles's attorney, I'll be reading his last will and testament, along with any additional documents he prepared before his passing. Haley practically bounced in her seat. We're ready. The initial reading went exactly as Aaliyah had warned me. Dad's estate, including the house and company shares, was to be divided 60% to me, 40% to Holden and Haley. I knew it! Haley squealed, grabbing Holden's arm. Miles loved us too much to leave us out. However, Aaliyah continued, her voice cutting through Haley's celebration. There is a codicil to the will, added 3 days before Miles's death. Haley's smile faltered. A what? A modification, Holden explained, suddenly looking nervous. What kind of modification? Aaliyah broke the seal on the envelope. The acceptance of any inheritance under this will is contingent upon a full investigation into certain financial irregularities discovered in the months preceding Miles's death. The room went silent. Even the camera seemed to hold their breath. What irregularities? Haley's voice had lost its triumphant edge. Perhaps these will explain, Aaliyah said, sliding the photos across the desk. Or this USB drive containing footage of attempted bribery. Or these bank statements showing systematic embezzlement from Harrison Industries. Holden grabbed one of the photos, his face draining of color. Where did you get these? Dad had quite the collection of evidence, Isaiah spoke up from his corner. "Including recordings of you both planning to contest the will based on false testimony about his mental state." Haley stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. "Turn those cameras off, now!" "Oh no," I said, standing to face her. "The cameras stay. You wanted to document this historic moment, remember?" "You can't do this," she hissed. "Holden, tell them they can't do this." But Holden was still staring at the photos, particularly one showing him entering a competitor's office with confidential company documents. "The codicil is quite clear," Aaliyah continued, professional as ever. "Any attempt to claim inheritance automatically triggers the release of all this evidence to the proper authorities. The choice is yours." "Choice?" Haley laughed hysterically. "What choice? You've trapped us." "No," I corrected her, my voice ringing with conviction. "You trapped yourselves. Every scheme, every plot, every attempt to steal what wasn't yours, it all led to this moment." "This is your fault," she whirled on Isaiah. "You were supposed to help us." Isaiah shrugged. "I did help, just not you." "Holden," she pleaded, "do something." But Holden was already standing, straightening his tie with shaking hands. "It's over, Haley. We've lost." "The hell it is. I won't let that bitch win. That bitch is my daughter." Dad's voice filled the room. Everyone froze as Aaliyah pressed play on a video file. Dad's face appeared on one of the camera crew's monitors, thin but determined, recorded just days before his death. "And if you're watching this, it means you've shown your true colors, just as I knew you would. Greed is a terrible teacher, but consequences are excellent students." Haley's mascara ran in black streaks as she backed toward the door. "This isn't over." "Actually," Aaliyah said, "it is. The police are waiting in the foyer to discuss the evidence of embezzlement. I'd suggest cooperating. It might help with sentencing." As Haley and Holden were led away, the cameras still rolling, I felt Dad's presence in every corner of the room. He'd orchestrated it all, not just to protect his legacy, but to teach one final lesson about justice and patience. "Well," Isaiah said into the silence, "I guess those cameras caught their historic moment, after all." The media circus that followed was exactly what Haley had wanted, just not in the way she'd planned. By evening, local news vans lined the street, and my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from reporters. "You need to see this," Isaiah said, turning up the volume on Dad's old television in the study. Haley's arrest was playing on every channel, her mascara-streaked face a stark contrast to her designer dress as officers led her to a police car. "The investigation into Harrison Industries has uncovered multiple instances of fraud," the reporter's voice droned on. "Turn it off," I said, rubbing my temples. "I can't watch anymore." Aaliyah burst through the door, waving her phone. "It gets better. The DA just called. They found offshore accounts, dummy corporations, everything. Haley wasn't just stealing from your father's company. She was running a whole network of fraud schemes." "And Holden?" I asked, not sure why I still cared about my ex-husband's fate. "Singing like a canary," Isaiah replied. "Turns out he's not so loyal when facing serious prison time." A sharp knock at the study door made us all jump. A police detective entered, looking apologetic. "Miss Harrison, we need to discuss some additional evidence we've uncovered." "More?" I gestured for him to sit. "What now?" "We found documents in Miss West's apartment suggesting this wasn't her first attempt at this type of scheme. There are at least 3 other cases of her targeting wealthy families, though she never succeeded on this scale before." Aaliyah leaned forward. "Other families?" "Yes. She would typically work her way into their lives through employment or social connections, then orchestrate situations to gain access to their assets." The detective pulled out a folder. "Sound familiar?" "The secretary position," I whispered. "It wasn't random." "No, it wasn't. She specifically targeted your ex-husband because of his connection to your father's company. The affair was just her way in." My stomach churned. 3 years of blame and self-doubt about my failed marriage suddenly shifted perspective. There's something else, the detective continued. We found this in her personal files. It appears to be a detailed plan for after she gained control of the estate. He handed me a document that made my blood run cold. Detailed notes about accidents that could befall me after the transfer of property, plans to frame Isaiah for financial misconduct, even sketches of how she wanted to remodel the house, starting with destroying Dad's garden. She would have killed me, I said flatly. She never would have gotten the chance. Isaiah growled, gripping the arm of his chair. The detective nodded grimly. This evidence upgrades the charges significantly. Combined with the fraud charges and attempted bribery, she's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. After he left, we sat in stunned silence until Aaliyah's phone buzzed again. "It's my contact at the DA's office," she said, reading the message. "Holden just finished his statement. He's admitted to everything, including helping Haley access confidential company files before Dad's death." "Did he know?" I had to ask about her plans for me. "No," Isaiah answered, scanning the documents. "According to this, she kept that part to herself. Probably knew he wouldn't have the stomach for it." A thought struck me. "Dad knew, didn't he? That's why he put all this in motion." Aaliyah nodded slowly. "He suspected. That's why he hired the private investigators, why he documented everything. He wasn't just protecting his legacy, he was protecting you." I walked to the window, looking out at the garden, now swarming with news crews. The roses still bloomed, oblivious to the chaos their previous admirer had planned. "We should release a statement," Isaiah suggested. "Control the narrative before Haley's lawyers try to spin this." Already drafted, Aaliyah pulled out her laptop. A simple statement about cooperating with authorities and requesting privacy during this difficult time. Professional, dignified, everything Haley wasn't. "Dad would like that," I said, managing a small smile. "There's one more thing," Isaiah said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "I found this in Dad's personal safe. It's marked, 'After justice is served.'" My hands shook as I opened it, recognizing Dad's handwriting once again. "My dear Maddie, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally come to light. Don't let this experience harden your heart. The garden still needs tending, and life still needs living. I didn't set this trap just for justice. I did it so you could be free. Free from doubt, free from fear, and free to bloom again. Love always, Dad." Outside, the reporters continued their live broadcasts, telling the world about the scandal, the arrests, the betrayal. But inside the study, surrounded by the evidence of my father's love and foresight, I finally felt something I hadn't experienced since finding Holden with Haley years ago. Peace. "So," Isaiah said, breaking the silence. "What now?" I looked at the roses outside, then at my brother and best friend. "Now we rebuild. Together." The preliminary hearing came faster than any of us expected. 1 month after the will reading, I found myself sitting in a courtroom, watching Haley and Holden being led in, wearing orange jumpsuits, a far cry from their designer clothes. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Aaliyah squeezed my hand as we stood. She'd insisted on being both my lawyer and moral support, saying some moments required both legal expertise and friendship. "You don't have to speak today," she whispered. "The evidence speaks for itself," but I knew I had to. Dad's last letter had said not to let this harden my heart, and staying silent felt too much like fear. Haley's eyes locked onto mine as she passed our bench. The hatred in them was palpable, but something else flickered there too. Desperation. Her lawyer had been trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wasn't budging, not with a mountain of evidence against her. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "the state would like to enter into evidence exhibits A through F, documenting a pattern of systematic fraud and conspiracy spanning 3 years." I watched as they displayed the photos, the bank statements, the recordings. Haley's face grew paler with each new piece of evidence. Holden just stared at his hands, shoulders slumped in defeat. The state calls Malene Harrison to the stand. Walking to the witness box felt like crossing an ocean. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. The journalists scribbling in their notebooks, the jury leaning forward in anticipation, Haley's gaze burning into my back. Please state your name for the record. Malene Harrison. Can you tell us about your relationship with the defendants? I took a deep breath, looking straight at Haley. Holden was my husband for 15 years. Haley was his secretary and the woman he had an affair with. And after your divorce? They married 6 months later. Then they started visiting my father, building a relationship with him while he was sick. Objection. Haley's lawyer stood. Relevance? Goes to motive, Your Honor, the prosecutor countered. Shows the systematic nature of their plan. Overruled. Continue. I described everything. The visits, the manipulation, Haley's threats in the garden, the evidence Dad had collected. With each word, I could see Haley's carefully constructed facade crumbling. Miss Harrison, the prosecutor held up the documents found in Haley's apartment. When did you become aware of these plans regarding your safety? Objection! Haley's lawyer practically shouted. Those documents are circumstantial, Your Honor. These documents detail specific plans to harm the witness after gaining control of the estate. The judge peered at Haley over his glasses. Overruled. I learned about them after their arrest, I answered, my voice steady. My father suspected something like this might happen. That's why he gathered all the evidence, why he changed his will. He was protecting me, even after he was gone. Haley suddenly stood up, her handcuffs rattling. He was a manipulative old man who couldn't stand to see his precious daughter lose anything. This whole thing is a setup. Miss West, sit down, the judge ordered. You think you've won, Haley shouted at me. You think this is over? I made your husband leave you once. I destroyed your marriage, and I'll find a way to destroy everything else too. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Bailiffs rushed to restrain Haley as she continued screaming threats. Holden looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Order! The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Remove the defendant! As they dragged Haley away, still shouting, I caught Isaiah's eye in the gallery. He gave me a subtle nod. Everything she just said had been caught on the court record, destroying any chance of sympathy from the jury. The judge called a recess, and Aliyah hurried me out of the courtroom. In the hallway, reporters clamored for comments, but she expertly steered me past them. Well, she said, once we were safely in a private room, I'd say that outburst just sealed their fate. Did you see Holden's face? Isaiah joined us, closing the door on the media circus outside. He finally saw her for what she really is. I sank into a chair, exhaustion hitting me all at once. Dad knew. He knew exactly how she would react when cornered because people like that can't stand losing control, Aliyah said, pulling out her phone. The DA is texting me already. They want to move forward with additional charges based on her threats in court. How much time is she looking at now? 25 to 30 years minimum. Holden might get less with his cooperation, but he's still looking at 10 to 15. I thought about Dad's roses, still blooming in the garden he'd loved. He always said the truth finds its way to the light eventually. Speaking of truth, Isaiah said, there's something else you need to know about Dad's evidence. Something we found in his personal safe this morning. Back in Dad's study, Isaiah pulled out a weathered leather journal. The police found this when they were doing their final sweep of Haley's apartment. It was hidden in a false bottom of her desk drawer. What is it? I reached for the journal, but Isaiah held it back. Before you read this, you need to understand Dad knew about this journal. It's why he was so certain about Haley's intentions. Aliyah leaned forward. Is this what I think it is? Her playbook? Isaiah confirmed. Detailed accounts of every family she's targeted, every scheme she's run, including her original plans for us. He opened the journal to a marked page and began reading. The Harrison family presents the perfect opportunity. Wealthy patriarch, strained family relationships, naive daughter who trusts too easily. The husband is the weak link, easily manipulated with flattery and attention. My stomach churned. You need to hear this, Maddie, Isaiah continued reading. Phase 1 complete. Marriage destroyed. Phase 2. Isolate the daughter from her support system. Phase 3. Gain the father's trust. Final phase. Eliminate all obstacles permanently. That's when Dad confronted her, isn't it? I asked, remembering Dad's sudden insistence on updating his will. Aaliyah nodded. He showed me this journal 3 months ago. That's when we started building the case against her. But there's more, Isaiah said, flipping to another section. She wasn't working alone. There's a whole network of people involved in these schemes. Names, dates, bank accounts, everything. A sharp knock interrupted us. The detective from earlier entered, looking grimmer than before. We've been going through Miss West's contacts, he announced. Found something interesting about her past. She's not who she claims to be. He laid out a series of documents on Dad's desk. Birth certificates, passports, driver's licenses, all with different names but the same face. Her real name is Margaret Phillips. She's wanted in 3 states for similar schemes. The FBI has been looking for her for years. Margaret Phillips. The name hit me like a physical blow. The woman who was convicted of killing that businessman in Florida? His death was ruled an accident, the detective corrected. But yes, same person. She served 5 years for fraud, got out, changed her identity, and started over. Your father was her biggest target yet. Aaliyah was already on her phone. I'm calling the DA. This changes everything. With these priors, she's looking at life in prison. There's something else, the detective added. We found this in her safety deposit box. He handed me a USB drive. It's footage of your father confronting her about the journal. Thought you might want to see it. With shaking hands, I plugged the drive into Dad's computer. His face filled the screen, sitting in this very study, looking directly at Haley. I know what you're planning. Dad's voice was steel. I've read your little journal. Quite the career you've had, Margaret. Haley's face on the screen went white. How did you really think I wouldn't investigate the woman trying to destroy my family? I've known who you are since the day you started working for my company. Then why did you let me continue? Because sometimes the best way to catch a snake is to let it think it's winning. Dad leaned forward. You're finished, Margaret. Everything you've done, everyone you've hurt, it ends here. You're dying! Haley, Margaret, spat. You can't stop me. Dad's laugh was cold. My dear, I already have. You just don't know it yet. The video ended, leaving us in stunned silence. He knew, I whispered. He knew everything, right from the start. And he built an airtight case, Aaliyah added. One that would protect you and expose her entire network. The detective gathered his documents. The FBI wants to talk to you tomorrow. With this journal and your father's evidence, we can take down her whole organization. After he left, I walked to Dad's chair, running my hand along the worn leather. He let her think she was winning, all while making sure she'd never hurt anyone again. Classic Dad, Isaiah smiled. Always playing the long game? Aaliyah's phone buzzed. The DA just approved the new charges. They're upgrading it to a federal case. Haley or Margaret will never see the outside of a prison again. I picked up Dad's journal from his desk, the one he'd kept all his life, and opened it to his last entry. Sometimes justice takes patience. Sometimes it takes sacrifice. But most importantly, it takes faith in the truth. Maddie will understand when the time comes. The garden will bloom again, stronger than before. The preliminary hearing resumes tomorrow, Aaliyah said softly. Are you ready to finish this? I looked at the evidence spread across the desk, at Dad's journal, at the garden beyond the window where all this began. Yes, I said, my voice firm. It's time to end this. For Dad, for everyone she's ever hurt, and for you, I added, looking at Isaiah. Mostly for you, he added. The gavel's final crack echoed through the courtroom like thunder. In light of the overwhelming evidence and the additional federal charges, this court sentences Margaret Phillips, also known as Haley West, to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Haley, Margaret, stood rigid in her orange jumpsuit, all traces of her former polished facade gone. When they led her past our bench, she stopped, turning to face me one last time. "I hope you're happy," she hissed. "You've ruined everything." "No," I replied calmly, meeting her gaze. "You did that yourself. The only difference is that this time, your target fought back." The bailiff pulled her away as she tried to respond. Behind her, Holden was already being led out to begin his own 15-year sentence. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us, but Aaliyah's firm voice cut through the chaos. My client has no comment, except to say that justice has been served, not just for her family, but for all the families affected by these crimes. Back at the house, Isaiah was waiting with a surprise. The FBI finished processing Dad's study. They found this hidden in his desk. He handed me a small box. Inside was a single key and a note. "For when justice blooms, check the greenhouse." The greenhouse had always been Dad's private sanctuary, a place he retreated to when he needed to think. I hadn't been inside since his death. "Want us to come with you?" Aaliyah asked. I shook my head. "I need to do this alone." The greenhouse key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the scent of blooming flowers. Dad's prized orchids still thrived, clearly tended by someone, probably Isaiah, during these past months. In the center of the greenhouse stood Dad's workbench, and on it, a large envelope with my name on it. Inside was a deed and another letter. "My dearest Maddie, by now, justice has been served and the truth has come to light. But justice wasn't the only thing I wanted to cultivate in this greenhouse. I grew more than flowers. I grew hope. Hope for you to find your strength again, to bloom despite the shadows others cast. The deed in this envelope is for the vacant lot next to your old flower shop. I bought it the day after I confronted Margaret. It's time for Harrison Gardens to grow beyond our home. Your talent for bringing beauty into the world shouldn't be limited to one garden." Story 2. "My sister's lies ruined my life and my family disowned me" is the title of this narrative. Years later, they want me back. Hi there, everyone. Prior to the start of today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Man, I've spent the last hour or so trying to figure out how to begin just gazing at this blank screen. I should just dive right in, I suppose. It has taken me years to be prepared to put all of this into words, and it is quite serious stuff. So my name is Eric, I'm 33 years old, and I'm a man now. This tale is about how my sister Anne ruined my life by lying to me. What followed? But you have to know what things were like before everything went wrong in order to comprehend anything. We were quite close while I was growing up, like perhaps even closer than most siblings. Despite our 4-year age difference, we were essentially great friends. Given all that transpired, I realize that seems strange today, but that was simply commonplace back then, you know? In school, I was never the smartest kid. Grades were always a problem, and most classes were barely passed. However, I had a strong interest in electronics, not like computers or programming. It's more like disassembling and reassembling things. Began with vintage radios and TV remote controls that I would find at yard sales. I had a soldering iron, multimeters, and crates of circuit boards and cables in my room by the time I was 16. Given that I would spend hours in there with the door shut, my folks found it strange. Yes, later on that becomes significant. But Anne understood. I started taking it seriously when she was around 10. She would spend hours watching me work while she sat in my room. She would constantly interrogate me about the functions of certain sections, the reasons for the connections I was making, and other such things. She would occasionally hold items as I soldered or assist me in organizing my pieces. You know, it was our thing. However, our parents undoubtedly played favorites and had this ideal child. The gymnastics team at Straight A Council of Students. The entire bundle. I was spending all of my time at the skate park or in my room with gadgets, hardly making it through my classes. Anne, however, was always there for me. Similar to this situation during my junior year. Instead of being suspended, I made up a story about how I was just holding the cigarette for someone else who ran away after I was caught smoking behind the gym. I even went so far as to cry to the principal about how I was trying to change my life and that a suspension would ruin everything. The principal was completely on board. She assisted me with the second homework. She explained things far more clearly than my instructors did, as if she would explain mathematical issues in a way that I could truly understand. To be honest, that was probably the only reason I completed high school. I also took care of her. I was rather protective since I was the big brother. Too protective, maybe. Taking a look back, I was the first thing any guy who wanted her had to deal with. I simply didn't want some random guys to bother my little sister. I wasn't trying to be rude. They never passed judgment on me, even when I started getting into problems, going out late and hanging out with the wrong crowd. She would pretend to be our parents in my place. Give me an explanation for missing curfew. I once got home at 3 in the morning, and she was waiting for me while sitting on the porch. I just wanted to make sure I arrived home without incident. Perhaps in hindsight, we were too near. Perhaps that's why many found it so simple to trust her subsequently. But everything seemed natural at the time. She was my dearest friend and sister, the only one who truly understood me. Our parents made an effort to pique my interest in everyday things. Even if they had enrolled me in after-school programs or sports teams, I consistently returned to my electronics. However, they believed that I was squandering my time and would stand up for me. He does it well. Let him do what he loves, she would remark. That is thee. And occasionally I make an effort to recall the younger sister who had faith in me when no one else did. The person who trusted me enough to confide in me about her issues, who would bring me food while I worked on projects, and who would defend me in front of our parents. Fuck, writing this is more difficult than I anticipated when things began to come apart. At the age of 18, I had just completed high school, and at the age of 16, I was beginning to attract the attention of boys at her school. Being the overly cautious sibling I was, like any older brother, I did what I had to do, scared them away. I wasn't exactly beating them up. I just made sure they were aware of my presence. Jake was one of the guys that was really obstinate, an elderly man who drives a luxury vehicle that his parents purchased for him. Typical stuff for affluent kids. One day I saw him attempting to get out of class with him. Please understand that he was trying to get my 16-year-old sister to skip school at the age of 18, so I probably shouldn't have pushed him against his car. Would any brother not be furious? That's when the gossip began. It was only murmurs at first. People at a school were remarking on how strange my extreme protectiveness was. Then things worsened. Someone began to claim that I wanted her for myself, which is why I didn't want other males around her. That kind of crap is sick. I can pinpoint the precise instant I recognized that something was seriously off. They would typically visit my room on Tuesdays after school to chat as I worked on my assignments. However, she went directly to her room this time. She told me to leave when I knocked on her door to see how she was doing. Later that night, when I sought to give her the embrace I normally gave her when she was sad, I discovered her sobbing in the kitchen. She recoiled, really recoiled from me. It had never occurred before. She returned to her room after mumbling something about being exhausted. The days that followed were strange. She never longer visited my room. Don't speak to me anymore? Really? I assumed she was simply going through a phase of adolescence or something. I ought to have been more aware. I was working on an old radio that I had discovered one morning. Additionally, I hear a knock on our front door. It was a booming, authoritative knock, not your typical knock. That makes your stomach plummet right away. When my dad answered the door, he saw a woman in a suit and 2 police officers waiting there. They requested a private conversation with him first. Though I couldn't understand what they were saying, I could hear them conversing in the kitchen. My dad then called me down. His expression, which seemed to be that of a stranger, will always stick in my memory. The woman in the suit identified herself as a CPS representative and stated that they needed to interrogate me about my connection with Anne. It turns out that she informed her guidance counselor that I had been fucked. Writing this is still challenging. I informed them that I had been improperly touching her, claimed that's why I kept my chamber door shut at all times, that I forced her to enter, and yes, the rest can be figured out. She informed them that if she ever told anyone, I would harm her. Said it was the reason I acted so hostilely toward those who expressed interest in her. Also claimed that the cables and zip ties in my room were for other purposes and that I had used the electronic items as a cover. My father didn't even challenge it. Not once. As they spoke, he simply stood there nodding, as if everything had suddenly made sense to him. The combination of the shut door, the hours spent in my chamber, and his protectiveness made him feel ill. I made an effort to clarify. I showed them my work. The crates of circuit boards and outdated equipment, as well as the partially repaired radio on my desk. They had already made up their minds when I tried to explain how she used to sit and watch me work, and how she would assist me with organizing sections. These leading questions were asked repeatedly by the CPS woman. Did allowing her to assist you make you feel special? Did you let her know that she wasn't like other girls? I only made it sound worse with everything I said. I was envious that she was beginning to enjoy other boys, and I couldn't tolerate her growing up and having regular relationships since it meant losing control over her. They claimed when they questioned me about the time I shoved Jake. The worst thing? She had a big tale about how I had been more combative recently because she was avoiding me after I told her that she was cheating on me by seeing other men. Even though none of it was genuine, I nearly believed her story because of the way she presented it. And then, in front of everyone, I lost it. "What on earth are you saying?" My voice broke. It was out of utter amazement, not rage. She refused to keep her eyes on me. With her arms around herself, as though she were a delicate creature in need of defense, she maintained her gaze on the ground. I was much more upset after that small behavior. "You are aware that this is untrue. You are aware of it." I looked at our father. In a desperate situation. "Dad, you know me. Come on." I wouldn't stop. His face was steady and his voice was quiet. He had never previously looked at me that way. "I'm not let down, not upset, just finished. You're not even interested in listening to me." I moved nearer, but he flinched and raised his hand as if I were a threat. She lost it. That was it. I knew then. "You can't take this seriously." I lowered my voice. I immediately lost all of my strength. I gave Anna another glance. "Observe her closely." She continued to avoid eye contact. "What are you doing?" "Yes, I was." At last, she raised her gaze. She was about to say something or perhaps retract everything. She doubled down, though, after glancing at Dad at the CPS, late at the officer standing in our living room. She started crying. "I'm sorry, Eric," she said after taking a trembling breath. I realized then that it was too late and she would not be able to take it back, since she had gone too far. Because she feared the repercussions. I genuinely laughed. "Whoa." I said, "This is what you're actually doing? Are you really doing this?" and tightened her embrace around herself. I simply couldn't contain it any longer. Dad's jaw tightened. "Gather your belongings. The station is where we're heading." That was the end of it. No proof, no trial, and no meaningful questions. I was silently driven to the police station by my dad, as if I was already guilty, as if I were an unknown person, as if I were no longer his son. All I could think about on the trip to the police station was how they managed to make everything fit. The lonesome elder brother who stayed in his room all day. The intimate bond that abruptly soured, the violent protectiveness, the strange pastime with all the tools and cables. They got just what they were hoping for. The police station interview room looked much as it does in movies. Before two detectives entered, I sat there for what seemed like hours. In his role as a nice officer, the male detective Rivers constantly repeating things like, "We just want to understand what happened. Help us help you, Eric." The female investigator, can't recall her name, simply sat there making notes while staring at me as if I were dirt. River began looking through my interest of electronics. "Tell me about your constructions." In an attempt to appear intriguing, I mentioned that I would assist you with these projects and that I would be repairing ancient radios and creating rudimentary circuits. Yes, she would hold items and arrange pieces as I soldered. She enjoyed finding out about it. The female detective broke in so she could handle your equipment by herself in your room with the door shut. It dawned on me then. How? Everything was being twisted by them. Suddenly, everything that was regular sounded strange. They continued to jostle around the barred door. Since I had expensive tools, I locked it. I attempted to explain that Dad would take things and not return them. "Or perhaps," River replied, his tone hardening, "for various reasons, you locked it." They had an entire dossier with statements and proof that I had begun to touch her when she was 12. I used the electronics to isolate her just as she began to show interest in my projects, taught her things no one else knew, making her feel unique. "That's crazy," I said. "She is my sister." She was fascinated, so I was teaching her. Either intrigued by electronics or terrified of the consequences if she wasn't, the female investigator leaned forward. The Jake incident was then mentioned. However, according to their story, I had attacked him because he was stealing from me. They have remarks regarding my possessiveness from other students at school, how I'd frightened away any men that approached her. River has taken a few pictures. That morning, my room was seized. They had created the appearance of a torture chamber. Close-ups of the wires, tools, and zip ties I used to organize my cables. In their pictures, even my project notes appeared ominous. "You would spend hours by yourself with and in this river, according to your father," said. "Do you want to share with us what actually transpired inside?" I went crazy, began shouting that they were perverting everyday brother-sister situations. Poor mood. Rivers simply nodded as if I had verified something. He said to his companion, "Classic defensive reaction." They then brought up my lack of friends and grades. The hours I spent by myself in my room created this entire profile of a reclusive, unstable man who was consumed by his own interests. They weren't only looking into it, they had a case to make, and I appear more guilty the more I disputed it. My attorney, if she could be called that at all, hardly retaliated. "We must think about a plea agreement," as though that were my only choice, she informed me. "After hours of this, you might face 20 years in prison if this gets to trial." At last, Rivers spoke. "Here's the thing, Eric. We have enough to cover costs. Serious accusations. However, if you collaborate with us, acknowledge the incident and express regret, we are able to assist you." I didn't make a mistake. "Probably for the 100th time," I said. "After that, describe why you would make this up." It didn't make logic, therefore I couldn't. My sister, whom I had looked after and protected, used to stay up late to make sure I arrived home safely. Why would she act in this way? What follows is a bit of a haze, Lawyers were consulted. My parents told me I had to find my own, even though they had employed one for a while. They assigned me a public defender who had just graduated from law school and was certain I was guilty. She informed me of my choices. I could fight it, but she made it apparent that winning wasn't probable. Victims are believed by juries, she stated bluntly. Anne is also believable, passionate, and youthful. She presented the facts. I might have been imprisoned for up to 20 years if I went to trial. Mercy was the plea bargain. No prison time, 5 years of probation, and a lifelong registration. She cautioned that you won't have another opportunity if you lose this trial. My own parents weren't even in my corner. Dad only gave a head shake. He advised against putting your sister through a trial. Accept the offer. But I said, I'm innocent. That's what they all say, she said, not raising her eyes from her papers. Your sister's testimony is with them. Recording of changes in behavior. Statements from witnesses regarding your possessiveness. A jury won't trust you over a 16-year-old girl who has experienced trauma. Before I accepted the offer, my dad paid me a visit. Since he left me off at the station, I hadn't seen him. I hoped that he would at last see the truth. Rather, he advised Eric to just acknowledge his actions. Don't subject your sister to hardship. Please, Dad, I pleaded. You are familiar with me. I would never, you know. He interrupted me. I believed I knew you. I suppose I didn't. My father and I didn't have a meaningful conversation after that. I accepted the offer after 2 days. Admit to sexually assaulting a youngster. Got 5 years probation and a lifetime on the registry. Some of you may ask why. If I were innocent, I would enter a plea. In actuality, they shatter you. They distort every ordinary aspect of your existence until you are unable to even believe what you remember. And you begin to wonder if fighting is really necessary when everyone, including your family, the police, and even your own attorney, thinks you are guilty. Being on the list wrecks your life in ways you'd never anticipate. Everyone speaks about the major stuff. It's the little things that really get to you, like not being able to live close to schools or get certain jobs. After everything, the woman was willing to let me sign the lease for the first place I sought to rent. She then completed the background investigation. I can still picture her expression when she realized what had happened. In fact, she retreated from me as if I were about to assault her in her office. I apologize, she said. My grandchildren come to visit. You understand? I'm sure. That turned into my life. People being sorry while treating me like some kind of monster and finding work was a nightmare. Once they realized I had to check that item, most places wouldn't even look at my application. The few interviews I did receive typically concluded in this manner. We'll give you a call. They didn't. I finally met Mike, a man who owned a small manufacturing company. He made hires. Some wouldn't. Former scammers. Guys like me who are addicts trying to clean up. The work was hard and the pay was terrible. But at least it was something. Look, on my first day, Mike told me, what you did doesn't matter to me. Just come up on time and do your job. Worked there for almost 2 years. Then someone found out about me and started causing problems, telling other workers they shouldn't have to work with someone like me, that I was dangerous. Mike tried to stand up for me, but eventually he had to let me go. Can't risk losing my whole workforce, he said. He at least paid me a respectable severance. I immediately lost my apartment. Ended up spending some time living in my car. Planet Fitness membership became my best buddy. $10 a month for a place to shower and use. The bathroom would park in 24-hour Walmart. Lots to sleep. Security usually left you alone if you didn't cause trouble. The worst part wasn't even the practical stuff, though. It was observing how life continued on without me. Through mutual friends on Facebook before they banned me, I saw a graduating high school with honors going to college on a full scholarship. I met Billy, a wealthy man, at a campus function. Meanwhile, I was eating cold ravioli from a can in my car, trying to figure out where I could park for the night without getting hassled by cops. Made the mistake of trying to date once I met this girl, Sarah, at one of my jobs. She was pleasant. Didn't ask too many questions about my past. We went out a few times. Things were going good. Then she asked why I always had to check the address of wherever we were going. I decided to be honest, told her about the registration requirement, how I had to be careful about where I went. Tried to explain that I was innocent, that it was a false accusation. She said she needed time to think. Next day, her brother and 2 of his friends showed up at my work. Had to quit that job too. Started hanging out at this little library branch after that librarian there. She kind of figured out my situation, but never said anything, would just leave books she thought I'd like on the returns card. A lot of technical manuals, electronics, books. Guess she'd noticed what I usually read. One day, she caught me looking at online courses, sat down and helped me find free ones I could take. Education is everyone's right, she said. Only person who treated me like a human being in years started learning about cryptocurrency through those courses. Figured it was something I could do without anyone checking my background. Turned out I had a knack for understanding the technical side of it. Made a little money here and there. Trading. But you know what really messed me up? Seeing comments on and social media. All these people talking about how brave she was, how amazing it was, that she'd overcome her trauma to be so successful. She even wrote this article for her college paper about being a survivor. People were calling her an inspiration. Meanwhile, I was barely surviving. Funny how that works, right? Used to think about trying to clear my name, but who would believe me? And was this perfect, successful college student? I was just some creep living in his car. The system doesn't care about people like me. That's how I spent much of my 20s, moving from job to job, place to place, never staying anywhere long enough for people to find out about me, never making friends. Because what's the point when they'll just leave once they know? Some nights I'd lay in my car looking at old family photos on my phone, pictures of me, and when we were kids trying to figure out where it all went wrong. I could have done things differently. That's the thing about being on the list. It does more than simply rob you of your freedom. It takes away your past, your future, your whole identity. You stop being a person and become a label. But suddenly everything changed. It was just a normal Tuesday. I was at work, found another factory job, better than the last one, when I got this email from some private investigator. I nearly deleted it because I thought it was spam, but I read it anyway. The guy said he'd been hired by Anne's husband, Billy, to look into her past. Guess she'd been acting weird lately. And Billy started digging the pee I had found inconsistent in her story about me and wanted to talk. I ignored it at first. I've already had enough people ruin my life. However, he followed up with another email proving his legitimacy. Court documents, case files, stuff I'd never seen before. We met at this diner just outside town, the Pie. I'll call him Frank, had this massive folder of documents. Your sister's story is falling apart, he said, spreading papers across the table. Years in this position. I've never witnessed someone so badly ruin their own lie. Turns out A had been sloppy, incredibly careless. Her timeline of alleged events did not correspond with school records. The witness statements from her friends, they changed every time she told the story. But what completely blindsided me was this. Remember Jake, the senior who kept hitting on her? Turns out he wasn't just some guy sniffing around and had been secretly dating him. And not just that she got caught in his car doing things she definitely wasn't supposed to be doing. She was convinced I was going to tell our parents about it. Maybe because she knew I'd always been protective. Or maybe just out of pure panic. Either way, she needed a distraction. Something big enough. Shocking enough to make sure no one even thought about Jake. So she made up the accusations, knowing that once those words were out, nothing else would matter. Frank had texts between Anne and her friends from back then. Screenshots she thought were deleted in them. She literally planned the whole thing, talked about how she needed a nuclear option to keep me quiet. She didn't expect it to go as far as it did. Frank said reading these messages seems like she thought they'd just send you away to live with relatives or something when your dad went full scorched earth. She was too scared to take it back. I just sat there reading through everything, seeing proof of what I'd known all along. Frank kept talking. Billy hired me because she's been acting strange lately, drinking too much, getting paranoid. He found her crying over old family photos one night when he asked about you. She completely shut down. That's when he called me. Then Frank pulled out one last document. A signed confession from Billy had confronted her with all the evidence, and she broke down and told him everything. "I need you to understand something," Frank said. "This isn't going to magically fix everything. The legal system doesn't like admitting it made a mistake, but it's a start." He left me with copies of everything. I spent that whole night reading through it all. The text where she planned it, the confession where she finally admitted the truth, even found some posts she'd made on some forum asking how to make abuse allegations more believable. The next day, I called a lawyer. A real one this time, not some overworked public defender who had already decided I was guilty. "We filed for post-conviction relief based on new evidence," my lawyer said, "and confession, combined with the discrepancies Frank uncovered, was strong enough to vacate my conviction and get me removed from the registry." It took months of hearings, but eventually a judge ruled in my favor. My record was wiped clean. I should have felt relief. I should have felt some. But all I could think about was how long it had taken, how much I had lost in the process. A week later, an envelope landed in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew who it was from before I even opened it. My parents. The first contact in 10 years. My hands shook as I tore it open, not from excitement, just sheer disbelief. Inside was a letter written in my dad's stiff, impersonal handwriting. They wanted to meet said and had finally come clean. Well, partially. She spun some watered-down version of the truth, painting herself as a scared little girl who made a terrible mistake. No mention of the calculated lies. The years of suffering. She put me through. But apparently it was enough for them to finally believe I was innocent. Tucked inside the envelope was a check for $50,000, a number that probably felt generous to them, like it could somehow erase a decade of being treated like a monster. Like it could buy back my stolen years, my dignity, my life. I held it up to the light for a second, then laughed. Nothing had changed. They still thought problems could be solved with a price tag. Money wasn't what I needed. I needed the truth to be known, and I needed to hear it from someone else's mouth. So I took the number from Frank and called him. My hands were shaking when I finally dialed. He answered after a few rings, his voice weary. "Billy, this is Eric." There was a long pause, then cautiously. "Eric who?" I let that sting for a second before answering, and brother silence, then a low, humorless chuckle. "That's funny because," and never mentioned having a brother. Never mentioned any family, actually. I swallowed down the immediate anger rising in my chest. Yeah, that tracks can't have the skeletons in our closet running their mouths, right? Billy exhaled sharply. Jesus. I knew she was hiding things, but this... I've been married to this woman for years. Had a kid with her, and I didn't even know she had a brother. Not one she didn't completely destroy first. I said plainly. There was another pause before he muttered, "Unbelievable." His voice had that tight, realizing just how deep they'd been played. Then he sighed, and when he spoke again, his voice was firm. Final. "I'm filing for divorce." I didn't say anything at first. Just let the weight of his words settle between us. Then finally I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Excellent." I said, "You deserve better." I hung up after that. No point in saying anything else. But as I set my phone down, a strange sense of relief washed over me. Then I found the social media posts and deactivated all her accounts, but not before posting this long apology about how she'd remembered things wrong as a teenager, made herself sound like the victim somehow. Poor confused girl who made a mistake, now bravely coming forward with the truth. Her perfect life started falling apart after that. Billy filed for divorce, the school where she worked. Yeah, she became a teacher. Imagine that. asked her to resign. Turns out they don't like having teachers who've admitted to making false abuse allegations. Found out later that Billy got full custody of their kid. Used Anne's confession to prove she was unstable. She tried to fight it, but Frank's investigation had uncovered other lies, too. Lots of them. The real truth. She'd been lying about everything for years, not just about me. Made up stories about other people, too. Had this whole pattern of accusing guys of stuff when things didn't go her way. Some people asked why she finally confessed. According to Frank, my parents had started noticing things and had been acting erratic for months, disappearing for hours without explanation, having sudden outbursts over nothing, drinking too much at family gatherings. But the final straw came when she slipped up. That was during a heated argument with my mom. She blurted something out. Something about how Eric wouldn't have suffered if Dad hadn't overreacted. My mom froze, pressed her for details and tried to backtrack, but it was too late. The doubt had already been planted. My dad, ever the controlling figure, started digging. He reached out to people from Anne's past, even called her old high school friends. And just like that, the cracks in her story started showing. By the time Billy hired Frank and was already spiraling, trying to patch together a lie that was quickly falling apart. So when Billy confronted her with the evidence, the texts, the inconsistencies, the proof she thought was long buried, she broke. And that's when my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was shaky, like she had been crying for hours. "Eric, please, we must speak." I almost hung up right then, but something in her tone kept me on the line. She started rambling about Anne, about how she had finally told them her side of things, how she admitted she had made some mistakes, but that she had been young, scared, confused. "She's not the same person anymore," my mother insisted. "She's broken Eric. She cries every day. She knows she ruined your life and she can barely live with herself." Then they actually asked, "Can't you just forgive her?" That made my blood boil. Forgive? If she had borrowed my car and crashed it, as if she had stolen some money from me, as if she hadn't stripped away my entire life, left me in ruins while she got to move on and play the victim for years. You don't comprehend. My mom continued. She's suffering now too. That was the moment I decided to meet them, not for closure, not to rebuild some broken family bond. I wanted them to know exactly what they did to me. "All right," I said, "let's meet." But I already knew how it was going to end. We met at this restaurant halfway between our cities. Mom started crying as soon as she saw me. Dad just sat there looking old and broken. "I guess having your golden child turn out to be a liar does that to you." Mom tried to hug me. I stepped back. "Let's just sit down," I said. They had this whole speech prepared about how sorry they were, how they should have believed me, how they wanted to rebuild our family. Dad even pulled out his checkbook again, like throwing money at it would fix everything. "Put that away." I told him I didn't come here for your money. Mom kept saying stuff like we were just trying to protect your sister, and we did what we thought was right at the time, making excuses like always. I let them talk themselves out. Then I pulled out the folder Frank gave me, started reading Anne's texts out loud, the ones where she planned the whole thing. Watched their faces as they realized just how badly their precious daughter had played them. She was scared. Mom tried to defend her. She was just a child. I was barely an adult. I said, "Where was my protection? Where was my benefit of the doubt?" "Dad tried next, son. We are aware of our error. We want to make it right. Make it right." I chuckled. "You want to make it right? Can you give me back my 20s? Can you undo the registry? The jobs I lost? The people who treated me like garbage?" They just sat there, finally running out of excuses. I told them everything then about living in my car, showering at Planet Fitness, eating cold food because I couldn't afford a place with a kitchen. Showed them the scars on my wrists. From my lowest point, Mom threw up in the restaurant bathroom for the first time in years. My parents were finally forced to sit with the truth. The undeniable proof that they had thrown away their own son without hesitation, that their golden child wasn't golden at all. I watched them sit there in stunned silence, their entire world crumbling in real time. "You did this?" I said, voice steady. "You let it happen." My father looked like he wanted to argue, like he wanted to defend himself, but for once he didn't. He just stared at the table, jaw clenched. Mom, though she still tried. "Eric, we were just trying to protect her. We thought we were doing the right thing." I leaned back, letting out a slow breath. "You know what the worst part is?" "I get that. I do. If I actually was some kind of monster, you would have been doing what any decent parent should do. But you never even gave me a chance. Not once you decided I was guilty, because it was easier than questioning Anne. And you let me rot for it." Tears streamed down her face. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We were so wrong. I let that sit for a moment because, yeah, they were wrong. They were more than wrong. But nothing they said could ever undo what I had lost. The 10 years of my life where I wasn't a person, just a label." Mom reached across the table, her hand shaking. "Please, Eric. We can't change the past. But we're still your parents. Can we? Can we at least try to fix this?" I pulled my hand back before she could touch me. "Make it right." I scoffed. "Tell me, Mom, how exactly do you fix 10 years? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Dad finally spoke. "You have every right to hate us." His voice was hoarse, aged. "But we're still your family." I gave a headshake. "No, you stopped being my family the moment you decided I wasn't worth fighting for." A heavy silence settled between us. They had expected anger, maybe even screaming. But I was past all of that. I didn't need to yell. They were drowning in their own guilt without me saying another word. Then Mom played her last card and is suffering too. Eric. I gazed at her. Naturally. Of course she would say that she lost everything. She continued her marriage, her career, her friends. She deserved to die. Cut in voice. Cold. Mom recoiled like I had slapped her. "She made a choice," I said, leveling my gaze at them both. "She lied, and I paid the price. But you." I looked directly at my father, who flinched under my stare. "You made a choice, too. You believed her without a second thought. You let them take me without hesitation." Dad shut his eyes for a moment, as if he could block out the truth. Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. "She's not the same person anymore." I let out a dry chuckle. Neither am I. And that was the real tragedy, wasn't it? The person they had known. The boy who spent hours in his room fixing radios. Who would have done anything for his little sister? He was gone. They had buried him a decade ago when they let the cops take me away. I grabbed the check my father had put on the table earlier. $50,000, a number they had probably pulled out of thin air, thinking money could erase what they had done. I stared at it for a second, then ripped it in half. "I don't need your money," I said. "I don't need anything from you." Mom started sobbing. Dad said nothing. He just sat there like a man, finally realizing he had lost something he could never get back. I stood up. "You made your choice," I said quietly. "Now you get to live with it." I walked out without looking back. I didn't feel anything when I left that restaurant. No rush of victory, no weight off my shoulders, just nothing. And maybe that was the real Chloe. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew who it was from before I even opened it. It was from Anne. I stared at the envelope for a long time before finally opening it. The letter inside was short. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." That was it. No excuses, no explanation. Just that I held it for a moment, then set it down, and I never wrote back. And yeah, life didn't magically become perfect after that. The damage had been done, and I would always carry the scars of those 10 years. But I was finally free. Really free. With my record expunged, I could finally live without the weight of my past hanging over me. I moved to a new city, started fresh, built up my electronics repair business from the ground up, and I never looked back. And my parents, all of it. They became ghosts of a life I had left behind. Maybe one day I'd think about them and feel some. But for now, I was finally living my life on my own terms. And it was sufficient.